I wasn't supposed to be at that coffee shop. I had this whole thing planned where I'd grab my usual order from the drive-thru on 5th Street, head straight to the office, and pretend like I had my life together. But my car decided to throw a fit that morning. Some weird grinding noise that made me pull over 3 blocks from my apartment, and I ended up walking to the nearest place with caffeine. That's how I ended up at Brew and Bean, this tiny spot tucked between a dry cleaner and a yoga studio that I'd passed 100 times, but never actually entered. The place smelled like burnt espresso and cinnamon, and every table was taken except for one 2-seater near the window. I ordered a black coffee because I was too flustered to think of anything else, and when I turned around with my cup, I nearly crashed into her. Sarah Mitchell. We'd worked in the same building for almost 2 years. Different departments, different floors, but we'd done that awkward elevator small talk enough times that I knew her name and she knew mine. She had this way of tucking her hair behind her ear when she was nervous, and I'd noticed it every single time we'd shared those 30-second rides up to our respective offices. "Jake," she said, and her voice had this tired edge to it that I'd never heard before. "Sorry, I wasn't looking where I was going." "No, totally my fault," I said, even though it wasn't. You want to sit? I just grabbed that table by the window." I don't know why I asked. Maybe because she looked like she needed someone to talk to, or maybe because I'd been wanting an excuse to talk to her for months, and my brain just seized the opportunity. She hesitated for a second, glancing at her phone, and then nodded. "Yeah, sure, that'd be nice." We sat down, and for the first minute or so, we just sipped our drinks in that comfortable, uncomfortable silence that happens when 2 people know each other just enough to feel weird about not talking. She had a latte with some kind of design in the foam, a leaf, or maybe a heart, and she kept stirring it even though there was nothing to mix. "Car trouble?" she asked, nodding toward the window where my beat-up Honda was very obviously not parked. "Yeah, something like that." "You?" "Just needed to get out of my apartment for a while." She said it casually, but there was something in her tone that made me look at her a little closer. Her eyes were red around the edges, like she'd been crying or hadn't slept. Maybe both. "Everything okay?" She laughed, but it wasn't a real laugh. It was the kind of sound people make when things are very much not okay, but they don't want to dump their problems on a near stranger in a coffee shop. "Define okay," she said, and then she looked out the window like she was trying to decide something. "My roommate kicked me out last night. Well, technically this morning, around 2 a.m. I set my cup down. "Wait, what?" "Yeah." She stirred her latte again, and I could see her hand shaking just slightly. "Her boyfriend's moving in, and apparently there's not enough room for both of us. She gave me 2 weeks, but I couldn't stay there another night listening to them argue about whether to get rid of my stuff or hers, so I just packed a bag and left." "That's insane. Where are you staying?" She shrugged. "My car, I guess. Or maybe a motel if I can find one that's not sketchy and doesn't cost half my paycheck. I've been looking at apartments online all morning, but everything's either way out of my budget or won't be available for another month." I felt this weird tightness in my chest, like someone had reached in and squeezed. I'd known Sarah for 2 years, and in all that time, I'd never seen her look this lost. She was always put together, always smiling in that polite way people do when they're pretending everything's fine. But right now, sitting across from me with her hair falling out of its ponytail and her eyes all red, she just looked exhausted. "That's messed up," I said, because I didn't know what else to say. "Yeah." She finally stopped stirring her coffee and took a sip. "Sorry, I didn't mean to dump all of that on you. You probably have to get to work. I'm already late. My boss stopped caring about my punctuality around 6 months ago." That got a real laugh out of her, small but genuine, and it made something in my chest loosen up a little. We talked for another hour after that. I don't even remember what about exactly. Work stuff, mostly. how her department was a mess because they'd just lost their manager, how my boss kept assigning me projects, and then forgetting he'd assigned them. Random complaints about the building's terrible coffee machine. Normal stuff. But there was this undercurrent to the whole conversation, this awareness that she was going through something really hard, and I was just some guy she barely knew who happened to be in the right place at the right time. Or maybe the wrong place. I still haven't figured that out. When we finally left the coffee shop, she walked with me back toward where I'd left my car, even though her apartment was in the other direction. We stood there on the sidewalk for a minute, both of us pretending to check our phones, and then she looked at me with this expression I couldn't quite read. "Thanks for listening," she said. "I know we don't really know each other that well, but it helped. Just talking to someone who isn't involved in all the drama." "Anytime," I said, and I meant it. She started to turn away, pulling her jacket tighter around herself even though it wasn't that cold out. And that's when I noticed the duffel bag slung over her shoulder. It looked heavy, stuffed full of clothes, and whatever else she'd managed to grab before leaving her apartment in the middle of the night. And suddenly I was thinking about her sleeping in her car, or spending money she didn't have on some rundown motel, and before I could stop myself, I said it. "Do you want to move in with me?" The words just came out. No filter, no second guessing. Just this impulsive offer that I immediately wanted to take back, because what kind of person asks someone they barely know to move in with them after one coffee shop conversation? Sarah froze. She turned back to look at me, her eyes wide, and for a second I thought she was going to laugh, or maybe just walk away without saying anything. But she didn't do either of those things. "What?" she said, and her voice was so quiet I almost didn't hear her. "I just mean, temporarily, until you find something else." I was talking too fast now, trying to make it sound less weird than it obviously was. "Sort, I have a 2-bedroom apartment and I barely use the second room. It's just storage right now. But there's a bed in there, and it's got a lock on the door, and I swear I'm not a serial killer or anything." "Jake, I know it sounds insane. I know we don't really know each other. But you need a place to stay. And I have a place, and it seems stupid for you to sleep in your car when there's a perfectly good room just sitting there collecting dust." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her trying to figure out if I was serious or just making some kind of joke. Her hand went up to tuck her hair behind her ear, that nervous habit I'd noticed a dozen times before, and I realized my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "I don't have anywhere else to go," she said finally, and the way she said it made my chest ache. "So is that a yes?" She bit her lip, glanced down at her duffel bag, and then back up at me. "Are you sure?" I wasn't sure about anything, but I nodded anyway. "Yeah, I'm sure." The drive to my apartment was quiet. Sarah sat in the passenger seat of my car, which had miraculously started working again after I'd let it sit for an hour, and she kept her duffel bag on her lap, like she was afraid to let it go. I turned on the radio to fill the silence, some pop station that was playing a song I'd heard 1,000 times but couldn't name, and I focused on driving, because if I thought too hard about what I'd just done, I'd probably start panicking. I'd invited a woman I barely knew to live with me. Temporarily, sure, but still. This was the kind of decision my mom would call me about after she found out, her voice all worried and disappointed, asking me what I was thinking and reminding me that I couldn't just rescue every person who looked sad in a coffee shop. But when I glanced over at Sarah, saw the way she was staring out the window with her arms wrapped around that bag, I knew I'd made the right call. Or at least I hoped I had. "It's not much," I said as I pulled into the parking lot of my building. "The apartment, I mean. It's kind of old, and the heater's weird, and sometimes the neighbor upstairs plays guitar at 3 in the morning. But it's clean, and it's safe, and the rent's not too bad. Jake, anything's better than my car right now." She said it with a small smile, but I could hear the exhaustion underneath it. I grabbed her bag before she could protest and led her up to the third floor. My apartment was at the end of the hall, 3F, and I had this moment of panic when I unlocked the door because I couldn't remember if I'd cleaned up before leaving that morning. I hadn't. There were dishes in the sink and a pile of mail on the counter and my jacket thrown over the back of the couch, but Sarah didn't seem to notice or care. "This is nice," she said, setting her purse down on the kitchen table. "The room's back here." I walked down the short hallway and opened the door to the second bedroom. It really was mostly storage. Boxes of stuff I kept meaning to go through stacked against one wall. But there was a bed with actual sheets on it, and a dresser, and a small closet. "I can move the boxes out this weekend, and there's space in the closet if you need to hang anything up." Sarah walked in slowly, like she was afraid the floor might give out under her feet. She sat down on the edge of the bed and ran her hand over the comforter, some blue plaid thing I'd bought at Target 3 years ago. "I can't believe you're doing this," she said quietly. "It's really not a big deal." "It is, though." She looked up at me, and there were tears in her eyes that she was obviously trying not to let fall. "You don't even know me." "Not really. We've had, what, maybe 10 actual conversations? 11 if you count today." That made her laugh, and she wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'll pay rent," she said. "Whatever half is, or a third, or whatever you think is fair. And I'll stay out of your way, I promise. I just need a couple weeks to figure things out, and then I'll be gone. Sarah, seriously, don't worry about it right now. Just get settled in and we'll figure out the details later." She nodded, but I could tell she was already running calculations in her head, trying to figure out how she was going to make this work. I left her alone to unpack, closing the door behind me, and went back to the living room to deal with the disaster I'd left behind that morning. I was loading dishes into the dishwasher when I heard her door open. She came out with her hair down now, wearing sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt, looking more comfortable than she had all day. "Hey," she said, leaning against the kitchen doorway. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why did you offer?" "Really?" I turned off the water and dried my hands on a towel, trying to figure out how to answer that without sounding like a complete idiot. The truth was, I didn't entirely know. Maybe it was because I'd spent 2 years wanting to talk to her, and this seemed like the universe giving me a reason. Maybe it was because I knew what it felt like to need help and not have anywhere to turn. Or maybe I was just tired of living alone in an apartment that felt too big for one person. "I don't know," I said finally. It just seemed like the right thing to do. She studied me for a moment, and then she smiled. A real smile this time, the kind that reached her eyes. "Well, thank you. For the right thing." That night, I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of someone else moving around in my apartment, water running in the bathroom, the soft creak of bed springs as she settled in for the night. It was strange and comforting at the same time, and I was just starting to drift off when I heard it. A knock on my bedroom door, soft but urgent. "Jake?" Sarah's voice was shaking. "Jake, I need to tell you something. About why I really left my apartment." My heart stopped. I sat up in the darkness, suddenly wide awake, and I knew that whatever she was about to say was going to change everything. Part 3. I turned on the lamp next to my bed and grabbed a t-shirt from the floor, pulling it on as I walked to the door. When I opened it, Sarah was standing there in the dim hallway light, her arms wrapped around herself. Her face was pale, and her eyes had that wide, scared look that made my stomach drop. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Can I come in? I don't want to talk out here." I stepped aside, and she walked past me, sitting down on the edge of my bed like her legs wouldn't hold her up anymore. I stayed standing, leaning against my dresser, or trying to ignore the way my pulse was hammering in my ears. I lied earlier, she said, staring at her hands. About my roommate. I mean, it's true that her boyfriend's moving in and she wanted me out. But that's not the real reason I left tonight. I waited, not trusting myself to say anything that wouldn't come out wrong. There's this guy, she continued, and her voice got quieter. Derek. I dated him for about 6 months last year, and when I broke up with him, he didn't take it well. He kept showing up at my apartment, calling me at weird hours, that kind of thing. It got bad enough that I had to file a restraining order, and for a while it seemed like he'd finally backed off. The room felt colder suddenly. I crossed my arms, my jaw tight. Tonight he was outside my building when I got home from work, and just standing there on the sidewalk, watching the entrance. He didn't try to approach me or anything, but I saw him. And then, around midnight, my roommate told me she'd seen him earlier that day too, asking the doorman which apartment was mine. Jesus, Sarah. I freaked out. I know I probably overreacted, but I couldn't stay there knowing he knew exactly where I was. So I threw some stuff in a bag and left, and I've just been driving around all night trying to figure out what to do. She looked up at me then, and I could see the fear in her eyes. And then I ran into you, and you were so nice, and I didn't think about how this might put you in a bad position too. What do you mean? I mean, if he figures out where I'm staying, if he shows up here, you could be in danger. I should have told you before I agreed to move in. I should have been honest, but I was so desperate and tired, and I just wanted to feel safe for one night. She was crying now, really crying, and I moved without thinking, sitting down next to her on the bed. Hey, it's okay, I said, even though I had no idea if it was okay or not. You did the right thing by leaving, and you're safe here. But what if he finds me? What if he finds out where you live? Then we deal with it. We call the cops. We document everything. We make sure that restraining order actually means something. But you're not going back to that apartment, and you're not sleeping in your car, okay? She nodded, wiping at her face with her sleeve. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for dragging you into this. You didn't drag me into anything. I offered, remember? We sat there in silence for a minute, and I could feel the weight of what she'd just told me settling over both of us. This wasn't just about helping someone find a place to crash for a few weeks. This was something bigger, something potentially dangerous, and I'd walked right into it without knowing. But when I looked at Sarah, at the way she was trying so hard to hold herself together, I knew I wasn't going to back out. Get some sleep, I said finally. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. She stood up slowly, heading for the door, and then she paused with her hand on the frame. Jake, there's one more thing I need to tell you about Derek. Something you should know before you decide if you really want me here. The way she said it made my blood run cold. I looked at her, waiting, and the expression on her face told me that whatever came next was going to be worse than anything she'd already said. Sarah's hand tightened on the doorframe, her knuckles going white. Derek's a cop, she said, and the words hung in the air between us like smoke. That's why the restraining order didn't do anything. That's why I've been too scared to push it further. He has friends in the department. He knows how to work the system. And every time I tried to report him showing up or following me, it somehow got lost in paperwork or dismissed as a misunderstanding. I felt like someone had punched me in the chest. Are you serious? I wish I wasn't. She was still crying, but there was something else in her voice now. Anger, maybe. Or just bone-deep exhaustion from carrying this around for so long. After we broke up, he told me that if I ever tried to make his life difficult, he'd make mine impossible. And he's been doing exactly that for 8 months. I can't prove half of what he's done because he's careful, and the stuff I can prove just gets swept under the rug by his buddies. I stood up, running my hands through my hair, trying to process what she was telling me. This wasn't just some regular stalker situation. This was someone with authority, with connections, with the ability to make problems disappear. Why didn't you go to a different police department? Or the state police? I tried. They said I needed to go through the local precinct first, follow the proper channels. But the proper channels all lead back to people who know Derek, who work with him, who probably wouldn't believe me anyway. She wiped her eyes again. So I've just been trying to keep my head down, hoping he'd eventually lose interest. But tonight, when I saw him outside my building again, I realized he's not going to stop. I sat back down on the bed, my mind racing. This changed everything. If this Derek guy found out where Sarah was staying, if he decided to show up here, I couldn't just call the cops and expect them to help. Not if he was one of them. Does he know about me? I asked. Does he know we work in the same building? I don't think so. We never talked about work much when we were dating, and I've been careful not to mention anyone from the office. But if he starts digging, if he decides to follow me or check my social media or anything like that, he'll figure it out eventually. The smart thing to do would have been to tell her I couldn't help her, to say that this was too risky, too complicated, that I had my own life to worry about and couldn't get involved in something this dangerous. That's what any reasonable person would have done. But when I looked at Sarah standing there in my doorway, terrified and alone, and trying so hard to give me an out, I couldn't make myself say any of those things. Okay, I said instead. She blinked. Okay, what? Okay, you're staying. We'll be careful. We'll keep the doors locked. We'll vary your routine so he can't track your patterns. And if he shows up, we document everything. Photos, videos, witnesses, whatever we can get. And we find someone who'll actually listen, even if we have to go over every cop's head in this city. Jake, you don't have to do this. I know I don't have to, but I'm going to anyway. She stared at me for a long moment, and then she crossed the room in 3 quick steps and wrapped her arms around me. I hugged her back, feeling her shake against my chest, and I tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for not making me face this alone. I held her a little tighter, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, something floral that I couldn't name. And in that moment, with her in my arms and the weight of her secrets pressing down on both of us, I realized something that scared me almost as much as the thought of her ex showing up at my door. I was falling for her, hard and fast, and completely against my better judgment. We'll figure it out, I said, even though I had no idea how. I promise. She pulled back just enough to look up at me, her eyes red but determined. He's not going to make this easy. Then we won't make it easy for him either. And as I said it, I heard something that made my heart stop. Footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment. Slow, deliberate footsteps that paused right outside my door. Then 3 hard knocks that echoed through the silence like gunshots. Sarah's face went white. She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in hard enough to hurt. That's him, she breathed. Jake, that's Derek.